Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. I just lost my cool in the BBC, but I was doing my best. But the sheer avalanche of misinformation that was being poured onto me, I couldn't help it. I was putting out fires left, right and centre. I know that's a mixed metaphor, ignore it. Because I was brought on to discuss the fact that the government is banning the use of taxis to ferry around asylum seekers to get them to medical appointments and things. But the sheer level of anti-refugee rhetoric that I got, I ended up having a go at the BBC host. And in my defence, I started off by trying to take the politics out of it.
So much of politics, people act like they're the only ones that say the obvious thing. Like, nobody thinks, like, no reasonable person would say that they wouldn't think that somebody who comes here, especially if they're an asylum seeker, a refugee fleeing war, persecution, disease, shouldn't be looked after. And if that requires transporting them to a hospital for medical treatment, then that's just going to be one of those things that has to happen. I think everybody is agreed that nobody wants people dying in the Channel. And I think pretty much anybody would agree, except for Reform Party politicians, that nobody wants to see asylum seekers die.
I didn't think I'd get away with that one, because usually they come back with but the Reform Party would of course deny those allegations. And so I was planning to come back with the fact that a Reform Party campaigner literally said that asylum seekers should be used as target practice in the Channel. The former deputy leader of the Reform Party once said that asylum seekers should be allowed to drown. And after Lucy Connolly said that asylum seekers should be burned alive, she was invited to speak at Reform Party conference. But yeah, I had the receipts.
Question is not spending money that you shouldn't have to spend. And if it's 600 quid on a taxi to a GP, that's obviously something that has to change. And if they're doing that, so be it. I think the issue comes when you start to make this a political issue. Like, this is the left that wants to somehow spend £15 million on taxis for asylum seekers, when that's just not true.
Kevin, this, look, the wider issue here is that asylum seekers have been increasingly housed in hotels, whether it's transport to appointments or the way in which the hotels themselves are being used. And now all of a sudden, this has started to be made public. And people are outraged by it. It's stoking a lot of anger, a lot of resentment.
You'll find that throughout this, Emma Vardy, the BBC host, will frame whatever she's saying as a lot of people are saying or a lot of people are thinking, which is the standard cop-out that right-wing people use to avoid backlash when they're spreading their ideologies. But here's former Conservative Minister Kevin Foster.
There's a chunk of people who, in some cases, abuse our visa system to be able to do that. That's really what's driving this. And then having effective solutions, in particular around removal from this country of those who've come fundamentally from safe and democratic parts of Europe to claim asylum here instead.
Okay. A couple of things there. One, on the issue of outrage, the question is, where is our outrage as a society being pointed? For example, right now we're looking at £15 million being spent on taxis, largely, not all, but largely for medical reasons. The idea that that's the main medical outrage in terms of misspent public funds, when the government that Kevin was a part of spent £18 billion on essentially fraudulent COVID contracts, 99% of which were awarded without any competition process to make sure those companies could actually do the job. That is money, that's public money spent fraudulently, but it's £15 million spent on asylum seekers. That's the main issue. And especially given that right now we have record levels of poverty that is being caused by the policy of this government and the previous government. But no, let's point the finger at asylum seekers. In a society where you have people that are extremely vulnerable, to constantly point the finger at, oh, these asylum seekers are getting something that the average citizen wouldn't get.
But that's how it looks to ordinary people, many ordinary people listening. Let's bring in Tony from Liverpool. He's on the line. Tony, what did you want to say?
People are coming here. They're taking out the pot. They don't want to contribute. That's a fact.
Okay. The idea that they're coming here and they don't want to work. Those people in those hotels aren't legally allowed to work. They've just arrived as asylum seekers. They're not allowed to work.
Yeah, but they're allowed to walk 5 minutes up the road to a doctor's.
Do you notice how the BBC host didn't correct the caller for saying that asylum seekers just don't want to work, when the reality is they're not allowed to work? But she still tries to paint them as lazy for accepting taxis that they don't need.
But that's not the point. We're talking, if it is too far away, if it's a distance that somebody would have to take a bus, then they're going to have to be transported there, and that should be done sensibly using public transport. And what was said before from Kevin about, they come from safe countries like France, that is the most morally vacant argument I ever hear about asylum seekers, because the idea that unless the entirety of Europe is completely on fire and at war, nobody should ever come to the UK, especially when we're talking about the Middle East.
They can't be all asylum seekers. There are people and they need help, and I get that. And I'll help anyone, I'm sure most of us would. But they're coming here. It's quite obvious to us that there are a number of people that are coming here because this is the better place to come.
So the Home Office figures show that about roughly 70% of people are coming from countries where there's a legitimate reason to flee. So places like Syria, places like Afghanistan, those are the sorts of countries people are coming from. And roughly 2/3 of all asylum applications are granted, which means that the vast majority of these people are legitimately refugees. So what you say about them not wanting to work, well, they're not allowed to work. What you say about them all just coming here for a better life, they're not really fleeing war. What the facts show from the Home Office that is simply not the case. So the argument we've got here, and Emma, what you said about this perception of these asylum seekers getting this better life that the average citizen isn't entitled to. The idea that we should all be jealous of asylum seekers and refugees, people who've seen their homes destroyed.
I think what Tony's getting across is it feels unfair, and it also feels like a bad use of taxpayers' money.
Where's the real unfairness? Where's the real unfairness in this country? The UK has some of the highest levels of wealth inequality in the Western world. The top fifth of the UK has like a vast majority of the wealth. This is a deeply unfair country. We have record levels of poverty. So the idea that we'd be pointing at asylum seekers as they're the ones who are getting this cushy life that we should all be feeling it's unfair towards, not the people who are earning 10 times, 100 times what the rest of us are earning.
Femi,
it's where you point the finger that's the issue.
Want to hear from Devon in London. Devon, thanks for calling.
In this country, they're rewarding criminals because these people who are taking the boat and coming here, they are criminals.
The Refugee Convention, which the UK has signed, says that anybody from any country has the right to try and claim asylum in another country. So they have a legal right to do so. It only becomes illegal if they enter the country and don't claim asylum. So the people we're talking about are not criminals.
But there was one caller who was on my side.
And regarding what Abdul was saying before about the fact that our governments, whether it's Labour or Conservatives, are largely responsible for a lot of the crises that these people are fleeing, whether it's supporting the war in Iraq or supporting Israel's genocide in Gaza, we create a lot of danger in the Middle East, and then we say, oh, because we're far from the Middle East, because there's a lot of safe countries between us and the Middle East, they shouldn't come here. It's morally disgusting.
To essentially burn their home and then pull up the drawbridge. But here's what made me lose my shit.
Look, you can hear people's anger, and you can hear people's frustration. How does any government now get public opinion, public sympathy back with asylum seekers? It's irreparably damaged, isn't it? With the boats that we've seen, the scandals like this with hotels, now the taxis. How on earth do you get public sympathy for asylum seekers in a climate like this?
Yeah, I don't think you're ever going to get a huge amount of sympathy for those leaving France or Belgium, perfectly safe democratic countries.
Emma, the question you just asked about how on earth do we bring back sympathy for asylum seekers after stories like this is not the asylum seekers' fault. This is government incompetence where they shouldn't be spending £15 million on taxis. And this is what I said. The idea that we are blaming asylum seekers, the idea that we're saying that asylum seekers are these ones that are gaming the system, when the maths shows from the Home Office official figures that the vast majority of them are legitimately fleeing war and persecution. The framing of your question...
Okay, Femi, what about those coming from safe countries? What about those coming from safe countries?
Which safe countries? Like France? Is that your argument? The argument that I just
it's not my argument. It's the argument that many people listening have, and many people the frustrations that many people have.
A lot of the crises that we're talking about, the people they're fleeing, are in the Middle East. There was a whole pile of European countries, safe European countries, between us and the Middle East. So your argument of because there are safe countries between us and the Middle East, people shouldn't come here if they're refugees, would imply that even though the UK has contributed to a lot of the crises that these people are fleeing, we should never accept any refugees. It's a morally disgusting argument.
So it's possible that BBC 5 Live won't be inviting me back anytime soon. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics. So Politics as an FU. Have a great week.